Welcome to this edition of One on One. I'm Howie Rose, and today I am joined by a man who has managed more games than anyone in the history of the New York Mets. He is one of 5 human beings in the history of planet Earth to have managed the Mets to a National League pennant, and he still is part of the Mets organization as a special advisor to General Manager Brodie Van Wagenen, and look, full disclosure, a longtime personal favorite of mine, Terry Collins. TC, good to see you again.
Good to see you, Howie. Nice to see anybody that's associated with baseball these days.
I understand. What's life for you down in Port St. Lucie without really having much involvement?
Yeah, well, it's been really strange. Obviously, right now we're just trying to stay safe. We're trying to quarantine ourselves and stay, out of harm's way down here. It's certainly we've got a huge issue going on in Florida now with the spiking of the virus, and so we're just kind of hanging around. And I go out and play a little golf, but don't play with a lot of guys, so it's a whole different life.
Now, speaking of golf, I remember you saying once that you don't want to get or even give strokes when you're on a golf course. You want to beat somebody straight up. Does that still work for you?
Yeah, I mean, that's the way that's all I know about sports. And I understand there's handicaps, there's guys that are better than you. But, I played a lot of sports growing up. And, I played basketball in high school, and they didn't lower the rim for me. And, because I was short. And, and I played baseball, they didn't move the fences in when I came up. So I just go out and play. I have a good time. And, if there's somebody better than you, then you shake their hand at the end of the round and say, hey, not good job. But, I'm not a big give strokes kind of guy.
I remember reading a pretty lengthy article about you. You were still managing the Mets. It might have been around the time you won the pennant in 2015. It said that you were so competitive when you were a kid that the other parents didn't want their kids playing with you. Is that accurate? Was that
my mother used to tell me the story after I started to get a little older that at one time a parent called her and said, my son can't play with your son anymore because he plays too hard. So when I came home from school, my mother, went to my dad and said, you need to talk to Terry. He plays too hard with the other kids. And my dad said, then tell him not to play with those guys. Yeah. So, he didn't want to ever change who I was or how I went about things. And, that's kind of the way I was. And to be honest, Howie, when you're my size, that's what helped me get through sports.
Coronavirus notwithstanding, do you miss managing? Do you miss being in the dugout? Do you miss the volume of moves that you make during a game?
Yeah, I mean that's what I got in baseball. It's the competition side of everything that that makes us tick. And I miss the guys. I miss the action. And there's nothing like managing in the major leagues because here you are, your team competing against some of the the greatest teams in the world in baseball. So it's a tremendous rush. It's a great thrill. And when you win, I mean, when we stood on that third baseline in Kansas City, when you finally got to the World Series, you look back over the 40-some years that I was in the game and saying it was all worth it. All the road trips, all the bus rides, winter ball, all the things you had to do, it was worth it to stand because when I was a little boy, the World Series, I actually got to stay home from school one day to watch the Yankees and the Pittsburgh Pirates play in the World Series. So, it always was a dream of mine to finally accomplish it. It was really fun for me.
Well, when you trace your roots in the Mets organization, they began as the field coordinator. And that was a position that really was needed for the Mets at that time because the farm system was somewhat in disarray, and they needed somebody to come in and really set it back on the right track. But after having had a couple of managerial jobs with the Angels and the Astros, did you think when you took that field coordinator's job that would be the rest of your baseball life?
Yeah, I had been the minor league director and the field coordinator for the Dodgers for a few years before I went to Japan to manage again. And I loved the job in Los Angeles. I loved it. To do both jobs was a little hard, but I loved being on the field. I loved the fact that I loved coaching. And to see those players get better, was really a thrill. And as I told the players along the way, we had Matt Kemp and Kershaw and Billingsley and Russell Martin. I mean, we had a ton of talent over there. And I always told them later on, we know it was all you guys and the efforts that you put forth and all of your talents that got you to the big leagues. But there's always a piece of a coach who thinks they had something to do with it. And so when I took over as the field coordinator with the Mets, I was happy. I could have stayed there forever and been content. But lucky enough that when Sandy Alderson showed up, I got my chance to manage, and certainly it was a great thrill for me.
Did any of those players that you just referenced from the Dodgers system find you along the way when you were managing in the big leagues? If you crossed paths with them and thank you or acknowledge the impact that you might have had on their careers?
Oh, a bunch of them have. I mean, when we played the Dodgers in the playoffs in 2015, before one of the games, I had a long conversation with Clayton Kershaw, and he said, when I left and went to Japan after the farm director, he said a lot of the guys in the organization said, man, we are really going to miss Terry Collins. And he said, we just all wanted to tell you that thanks for all you did for us and all the work and the leadership stuff. That was, Matt Kemp used to talk about it a lot. And he said it used to come into town, and boy, all the guys all saying, oh man, we got to get ourselves going. Terry's coming into town. So, and I think, as I was taught many, many years ago, players will take on the personality of the guy in charge. We were lucky. We had great talent, and, we asked a lot of our players because I really felt that, we knew we had some big league talent coming along the way, and I didn't want anything to step in the way of that talent. I wanted those guys to understand they got a chance to be stars and bring the Dodgers a championship. And as I look back and look at all those great players, again, did I have a piece of it? Yeah, maybe a small piece, but I'll tell you what, they were willing to pay the price to get better.
So then in retrospect, what do you think was the influence that you might have had on some of the kids that you helped in the Mets system that one year that you were the field coordinator? Who do you think bore most of the fruit of your labor with that player or players?
Well, I guess it's really difficult to say because, when I got, a lot of those guys had left, but, how I preach this, in order to be good, you have to have self-discipline. You can't always rely on somebody to push you. You've got to be able to push yourself once in a while. And that comes with respect for the game and respect for the sport. I used to tell the players, look, when you sign that contract, nobody put a gun to your head to sign it. And therefore, you owe the game something. You owe the game everything that you have to get better and to prove that, hey, look, down the road, you're going to be better for the fact that you use maximum effort to improve. And I look back and I see those guys, and that's why I say I think there's only one way to play the game, and that's all out. When you leave the field, when it may be the last game you ever play, when you look back, you can't ever regret anything. I go back to a story when I managed the Angels. Garrett Anderson was one of my players there, and one day he didn't run a ground ball out, and I took him out of the game. And he came in 2 days later, and he sat down. He said, Terry, he said, I was mad and you took me out, but he said, you know what, I've looked at things, and I don't ever want to look back when I retire and say, I wish I would have played the game harder. And that's kind of how I look at things, that, you respect the sport. And even now, how you look, when all these great players, when they all retire, the game will continue. So, to them, to respect the sport, to what it's brought for everybody, I think is the utmost, and therefore requires your maximum effort to get better.
Garrett Anderson was one guy who, kind of affirmed your philosophy, but along the way, there was some who didn't see things your way. And I know you've talked about how much you learned from the experience of managing the Astros and the Angels, to the point where you felt you had to make a conscious effort to change certain things about your ways when you came to the Mets. What were they, and how proud of you with the way that turned out?
Well, yeah, I'm a pretty intense guy. And, again, as we talked earlier, that's how I went about through life. I was a real intense guy. And sometimes that rubs people the wrong way. And as a matter of fact, Garrett told me one time, I asked him if he had any issues with me. And he said, Terry, we know you want to win, but for me, you're round a little tight. Well, that's just who I am. And so you got to adapt. But when I got my chance with the Mets, I decided I've got to enjoy the job. I've got to enjoy the experience a little bit more. It's winning comes with the talent that you have on the field, and to get those players ready, to have them play up to their capabilities. But you know what? You got to have fun, because in New York, it's a tough place to manage. And if you're not having any fun, it's not worth all the hours you spend at night trying to figure out what you're going to do tomorrow. So when I got to New York, I said, I'm just going to enjoy the players a little bit more and enjoy the game a little bit more, have some fun. And I think I did that.
And when you got there, let's face it, the Mets were really in the early stages of a full-out rebuilding program. So did you think, as you started with the Mets, as I think a lot of people around baseball did, that you were going to be a caretaker here, And eventually
Right.
the team would get better, and whether you would remain there or not, was sort of an unknown. But did you have any expectations when you took that job, given where the franchise was at, that when you left, you would have managed more games than anybody in the history of the franchise?
No, I had absolutely no idea. I knew when I took over that, hey, we were going to rebuild. Those were things that were explained to me. Hey, we're going to make some changes as we go along. And when I first came to the Mets, we had a pretty good team. We had some injuries that hurt us a little bit, but we had a good team. And along the way, we knew we were going to have to trade, get rid of some contracts, and that was all part of it. But the one thing I thought, if I went about the job correctly, it wouldn't really matter as long as we continued to get better. And fortunately, guys bought into it. My relationship with the ownership, with Jeff and Fred and Saul helped, and my relationship with Sandy Alderson. I mean, there was never a day in 7 years that I was with Sandy that we didn't have a conversation about something. And I thought that was very important. I told Sandy, I thought the general manager relationship has to be important, and it has to be a situation where you can argue at 4 o'clock and at 6 o'clock go out and have dinner and have a good time. And I think that really helped as I went through the years that, hey, look, I bought into the program. I didn't complain. I didn't worry about who wasn't in the clubhouse. I only worried about the guys whose names were on that locker that particular night. And I think that helps in New York.
Anybody who was there would support the fact that even as the team did not have great amounts of success towards the end of some of those early seasons, they never quit. And, that meant that you had to keep your foot on the pedal somewhat. How delicate a balance was that, knowing that, all right, you weren't going to go to the postseason, and maybe there were some guys who were, not going to have long big league careers ahead of them. But how did you keep them focused to the point where they didn't pack it in?
Well, I'll tell you how one of the keys, many years ago when I was managing the Angels, our color announcer on our television broadcast was Sparky Anderson. And former manager, great man, a Hall of Fame manager. And I used to spend a lot of time with Sparky. And one of the things he talked to me about was make sure that the star players on your team understand who you are and what you are, and you do the best to make sure they can stay on your side. And I did that in New York, with David Wright, with Johan Santana, R.A. Dickey at one time, Jose Reyes. All those guys were there. Carlos Beltran and I today are very, very close friends. I went to those guys daily and made sure they understood what was going on. I took their advice on these things. I had them included in the rules of the team. And so I made them be a part of it. And therefore, that clubhouse, they ran the clubhouse. I didn't even have to worry about it, because if you didn't play the game the way they played the game, they had something to say about it. I didn't even have to worry about talking to players. And I think that change of my philosophy coming into New York really helped me with those guys.
When you look back to one of your predecessors, Bobby Valentine, he got a lot of mileage out of players that most other teams didn't believe in. Guys like Benny Agbayani and Matt Franco. I mean, they really were integral parts of some pretty successful Mets teams. Did you have one or two players like that who you felt came a lot further than everyone expected that they would, and ultimately contributed to some success?
Well, I will tell you, I'll give you one name right now. That's Justin Turner. When we first got Justin Turner, we got him in trade, and I had seen him play in Buffalo when I was the field coordinator. And you know what? When he got to the big leagues, I showed that I believed in him. I believed in his talent and what he could do. And I put him in big situations, and all he did, he strove to be he strove to be better, and he strove to come through in those big situations, and did. Dan Murphy. I mean, I love Dan Murphy. He's a baseball junkie, and he was another one. Hey, look, when I put him at second base, people said, well, defensively he can't handle it. But I knew Dan would work himself to the point where he could handle it, and did handle it, and became a very, very adequate second baseman. So, I think some of those guys that, like those guys, they took it and said, hey, look, here's my chance. And the manager believes in me. The manager trusts me. And they went out and became very, very good players.
Was Justin Turner one of those heated conversations you might have had with Sandy Alderson? But because obviously he's a guy who really flourished after the Mets failed to keep him.
Yeah, Howie, and again, I think you got to give the credit to Justin. I mean, he changed his swing. The year he was looking for a job. But, one of the things I talked about, he could hit. And when you have the ability to put the barrel of the bat on the baseball and you want to change some things, hey, look, I got to get the ball in the air a little bit more. They can do that. Dan Murphy could do it. Justin Turner could do it. So I give all the credit to Justin Turner. But, I stayed out of that kind of stuff with the general manager. I did not ever went to Sandy and said, hey, I need this guy or I need that guy. He knew what he was doing. He knew his job. And, he and his staff and the scouts, they knew what kind of players they were looking for. And so, I felt bad when we lost Justin, but really those things are out of my control. And as you know, Howie, if I sit there every night and worry about things that I can't control, I'll be miserable.
Well, you got a handful of players to help you around the trade deadline in 2015 and what turned out to be just a magical last couple of months of what became a pennant-winning season. As you were moving towards that trade deadline, if someone would have told you, say after that game that Justin Upton won in a rainstorm, a long extra inning game with an opposite field home run that really seemed to be the low point, that a few months later you'd be playing in the World Series, would that have been as big a shock to your system as anything you experienced in baseball?
Absolutely. I mean, we knew we had that great young pitching staff, but that's where I credit Sandy and I credit Jeff and Fred. Hey, look, they bought in. They knew we had the makings of a pretty good club, and to be able to go out and get some help changed the attitude completely. When we got Yoenis Cespedes, the attitude in the clubhouse was different. And then all of a sudden, in walks Addison Reed, and in walks Juan Uribe, and in walks Kelly Johnson. All of a sudden, those guys are looking around that locker room saying, hey, we got big league players, big time big league players, guys with experience, guys with playoff time, world champions. And so all of a sudden, it just changed the dynamics of the way guys went about the game. And, we had a weapon for no matter what the other team did, we had a weapon for them. And I'll tell you, the players bought into it. They knew and every night we took the field, we felt we were going to win. We knew we put that stud on that mound, and that's where it all started. And everybody in the clubhouse knew, hey, look, if we just go play our game, and I'll tell you, I go back to Michael Kadire, the job he did because David had been hurt, and Michael took over the leadership in that clubhouse, and we started handing that belt out every night, and it became something that the players wanted. They wanted to win that thing. So to go out and execute the way they did, I couldn't have asked for anything more.
Sometimes those things kind of snowball the way they did, I think, at its peak in that 3-game series in Washington right around Labor Day in 2015, where you were behind, I think, in every game, in one case 7-1, and you just won dramatically every day, all 3 of those games. Is there a sense within the dugout that even when you're down X number of runs, just because of the way things had been unfolding, that you kind of feel it, even if most other people would not at that time?
No, you absolutely are correct. Guys talk about it. We're down 7-1 or something against the Nationals, and all of a sudden we get a couple hits, and somebody hits one out, and now we're only down 4. And guys are talking in the dugout. We're going to get these guys. We're going to get these guys. And and Cespedes hit the big home run off Storm to give us the lead the one night. Kirk Neuenhuis off the bench. It's a pinch hit. It might have been a grand slam off Papelbon. These guys felt they could come back, and they talked about it during the game. That, hey, look, just hang in there, and it's unbelievable how. What kind of, when you feel positive about what you can do and the guys around you, boy, what you can accomplish.
So you go on to win the division. You beat the Dodgers in an incredible division series, really, because that's where Jacob deGrom reached real national prominence. It's ironic that it happened at Dodger Stadium because that's where Tommy Lasorda had nicknamed Oral Hershiser Bulldog. Jacob deGrom, was that about as bulldog a performance as you'll ever see from a starting pitcher under those pressures? Incredible.
But, he showed signs of that. How if you go back to his, I don't know if it was his second or third start, it was in Citi Field, and he's pitching, and gosh, he didn't have his break. He didn't have his slider. His curveball wasn't working, and he lived with his fastball and his changeup, but he still used his breaking pitches. And all of a sudden in the 5th inning, he got a feel for him, and you looked up and he gave you 7 innings. And I thought, wow, this kid's got a sense on how to pitch. But that game 5, that was unbelievable. He seemed like he was in trouble, and he just kept pitching himself out of trouble. And that's when you knew this guy's got a chance to be great.
Were you close at any point in that 1st or 2nd inning to having to go to your bullpen? I think you had Noah up in like the 2nd inning, right?
I did. Early. We talked about it, but again, I was very lucky. I had some really good coaches around me. And when we were sitting on the bench talking about it, Dan Wortham, the pitching coach, would say, "Hey, look, let's just get. I think he's starting to get a feel for it. Let's stay with him another inning." And and I'll tell you what, that's one thing about, again, what I said earlier. When your coaches and your manager have confidence in you, you pick it up. And Noah, Jake just kept picking it up and got us deep into the game, which is what we needed.
So you win that game, the 5th game. You go on to play the Cubs for the National League pennant. Turns into a 4-game sweep. And I know you guys never say anything's easy. Yeah, it's not. I get all that. But still, that last game, you get a huge lead early. I think it's 6-0 in the 2nd inning. And, you got Matz on the mound, and he's unproven, and you're only going to get a certain amount out of him, and the bullpen was still going to have to get you home. But once you got to the 8th and 9th inning, you got a 5-run lead. Are you standing in that dugout at any point thinking to yourself, there's got to be a catch? I mean, all these years I've spent in baseball, we're 3 outs away from winning the pennant and going to the World Series. This has been a whole lot easier ride, this series, than it was supposed to be. Were you kind of waiting for the bubble to burst?
Well, not really. Again, as you said just a little bit ago, we were on such a roll. I mean, we were just – no matter what we did, couldn't go wrong. I mean, we had guys stealing third base and, ran the bases in that series better than we had all year. And it was just that sense that, hey, look, we're winning this thing. These guys, they just had that makeup and that. I mean, late in the game, when I brought Bartolo in and he struck out Chris Bryant on that sinker. I mean, no matter what we were doing, we couldn't do anything wrong. And the guys were just so high and so, that adrenaline was flowing so strong that I really felt very, very confident. And I said, they caught us at the wrong time. And when the game was over, I talked to Joe Madden, and he said, I'll tell you what, if Steven Matz is your 4th best pitcher, you guys are going to be really good. And so and that's just the way I think when teams get hot, and especially at the major league level with that tremendous talent, that's why you'll see these kind of teams win.
So Familia strikes out Dexter Fowler, gets a called 3rd strike. Seemed like it took an hour and a half for the umpire to finally ring him up. Take me inside your head for the first 5 or 10 seconds after strike 3 to Fowler.
Well, again, all I can tell you is that, I've been a baseball fan and a baseball junkie my whole life, with the one desire of getting to the World Series. And when that happened, my first thought is, oh, my God, I'm going to the World Series. And I turned around and saw the faces of the coaches, and knowing that, again, as I said, you just take a quick second and think about all you went through, all the years to finally get there, and you sit back and say, I wouldn't trade it for the world.
What I'll remember is being on the bus the next day when we're going to the airport to go home from Chicago. And Terry gets on the bus and says, everybody check their tickets because this bus is going to the World Series. And you were so emotional when you said that. The whole bus cheered. I can't imagine that your baseball life wasn't flashing by you when you made that little statement. Would that be accurate?
Oh, no doubt about it. Howie, I said it after the game, but, we beat the Chicago Cubs on my mother and father's wedding anniversary. And they had both passed away. And my first thought was back to all the times that, my dad drove me to a game, or my mom was, showed up in college at a game that who would have expected it. So, the 2 biggest fans who were huge baseball fans and, were in my corner the whole time, they had to be looking down, smiling. And that was something when that game was over. I said, boy, my mom and dad sure would have been proud to be able to be a part of this. And so, the next day, I was still pretty excited about finally getting that chance to go to the World Series.
And I've also heard you say recently that you've kind of gotten over a couple of things, that, the tension that you felt during Johan Santana's no-hitter, the 134-pitch no-hitter, the only one in Mets history, was tough for you at the time. And obviously the decision to let Matt Harvey go out and pitch the 9th inning in Game 5 of the World Series. How have you gotten to the point where you were able to kind of come to peace with that?
Well, I think it's more than anything the fact that so many fans have, come up and sided with what the decisions, to where I can't tell you how I kind of make a joke about it, but I've had so many fans. There must have been 115,000 at Johan's no-hitter because I had a lot of fans. Oh, I was at the game. I think one of the biggest compliments was I saw a guy one time in a restaurant in New York, and he came over and he just said, "Hey, look, I just want to take a second to thank you for leaving Johan Santana in." He said, "I took my dad to the game." And he said, we were there till the final pitch. And he said he died shortly, not long after that. And he said, I'll go back. And he said, it was the greatest moment of my life to be able to take my dad and let him see Johan Santana pitch a no-hitter. I just wanted to thank you for leaving him in. And those are kind of the responses where you say, geez, I did the right thing. But at the time, you know how important he is to the team. He's got a bad shoulder. And, so it was difficult for me to watch those last 3 innings, I can tell you.
And the ironic thing is that you probably were never more popular as manager of the Mets until that video came out of you and Tom Hallion and, his butt being in the jackpot and all that after Noah was thrown out of the game against the Dodgers. Do you find that ironic?
I do. I really do, but it shows you the emotion of baseball fans, especially New York baseball fans and Mets fans. They love passion. And, that's one of the things I talked to Luis Rojas about. I said, listen, these people, they know the game. So, and don't be afraid to be yourself. And if you get angry, they love it. When Brody 2 years ago kicked the chair or threw the chair in the coach's room, I sent him a little text and I said, welcome to New York. And I said, don't feel bad because the Mets fans are very, very passionate. They love the energy. So I was a little surprised it took off like that, and I'm still waiting for an apology from Major League Baseball that's got leaked out. But
never mind the apology. You should get royalties.
Well, I got grandkids. Had to see that,
Yeah, that's true.
So, but it's and I was just thrilled to be able to be there 7 years and live the ups and the downs. And it's all part of our game. And ever since I stepped down, the one thing I look back on is, hey, how many things would I have changed? And obviously you want to take 2 decisions back that you made here or there, but you know what? Hey, look, you can't. So you got to be accountable for them and stand up and realize what a great ride it was.
And you mentioned Luis Rojas. You've known him for a long time. What kind of manager do you think he'll be?
I think he's going to be really good. You know what? He's got a great feel for the game. He's got a great feel for his players, obviously coming from a tremendous baseball family. And you talk about a guy, if he needs advice, he's got his father. You can just go to him, and you can't get any better than Felipe Alou. So I think he's going to do great. He's got a good team. And one of the things I tried to tell him is, look, don't overmanage these guys. You got a veteran club. They know what they're doing. You've got some good young talent. Go let them play and be there if they need some direction.
Last question for this year at least. Which of the rules changes do you hate most? The 3-batter rule for an incoming pitcher or putting a runner on second base in extra innings?
Well, I hate the 3-batter rule. Howie, there's some really, really good pitchers who aren't going to pitch very much because they're just not, unless they get the last out of an inning. But, we went a long way with Jerry Blevins pitching so many games because he came in and got one guy out. And now you're going to ask him to do something that he's not accustomed to, and I think you're asking for failure. And, that's the one thing I learned a long time ago. Our job as a manager is to put guys in positions where they're going to be successful and not failing because Major League players, they don't like to be embarrassed. And you're going to have guys, pitch to hitters they shouldn't have to pitch to. And to be honest, now the runner at second base, I understand that. I've seen it. But you know what? It is kind of, it's really good for the fans. You got a chance to, in a tie game to win the game outright in short. And I think it's going to help save some pitching. I don't think you'll see those 20-inning games anymore. So, but I still think in the strategy of the game itself, having that pitcher coming in to face that one guy, I think is big.
Well, Terry Collins, yours has been a wonderful baseball life, and you are a huge part of the history of this New York Mets franchise. So great talking to you again. Stay well, and hopefully we'll see you before long.
Thanks, Howie. Thanks for having me on. You guys stay safe up there.